It's now my pleasure to turn to a little farther afield. As we said, we have many cousins here. I got to meet some of our Nepalese cousins today over the lunch break, and now I'm about to introduce you to some of our Hawaiian cousins. So yes, absolutely. So it's my pleasure to call on Dr. Larry Kimura. He has a PhD in Hawaiian. He's Associate Professor of Hawaiian Language in Kahakaula o Ke'oliko College of Hawaiian Language. How's that for a... And he's the chairperson of the Hawaiian Lexicon, New Hawaiian Words, Committee for the Kuamo'o. Can we all say that? Kuamo'o Hawaiian Language Center of the college, focusing on Hawaiian curriculum development and teacher's license for the Hawaii's Department of Education K through 12 Hawaiian immersion and medium program. So please help me in welcoming him to the podium.
Hi, aloha pumihana kako apau, ka akoko ana mai ke I aha, e ho hano ana hoi ke ola o ka kako o lelo. E ola ko o lelo, o iwi o na aina a puni ka honua. No leila, I will try and confine as much as possible on my topic in short order, within 40 minutes, I hope so. The title, of course, of my presentation is The Fabric of the Hawaiian Medium Education for Hawaiian Revitalization. There. And so, the importance, of course, that we have placed on 36 years of Hawaiian language revitalization has been through the formal institution of learning that we all know as a school. And schools to us today could be from infant toddler age, preschool age, into elementary, to intermediate, into high school, into tertiary college levels. And that's how far Hawaiian language medium education has reached since 1983, 36 plus years ago. And as we started, we had nothing except what we had, which was about 2,000 native Hawaiian language speakers, and many of them, of course, in their senior years. And today we have less than 20 remaining. And most of those 2,000 back in 1983 actually were not using the language in the home with their own children, of course. That's my mother's a native speaker of Hawaiian, but she never used it with us. And when we started our preschool, we just started with 2 preschools, and the one that I started in the main island of Oahu in Honolulu, we started with 7 little children. We had no money, we had no place to conduct the school, but we knew that we're not going to be doing babysitting. It would be a school, early childhood education. So here we were starting off in our Hawaiian medium education program. So today, in census of 2016, 2018, we counted 18,400 people who have indicated on the census under the age of 5 and above that the language of the home is Hawaiian, and that most of the people who are speaking Hawaiian at home are young children. So this indicates, of course, to me that our program in Hawaiian medium education is working. We are regenerating new speakers of the Hawaiian language, and they're speaking it in their homes. Of course, we have at last year, 2018, registered 3,351 children from preschool age to high school, enrolled in 23 of our Hawaiian immersion schools scattered throughout the islands. Most of you have been to Hawaii, and I want to say aloha to those of you who have met through numerous conferences. And thank you for coming to our conference in Hilo, held every 2 years. We had our 6th conference, the Hilo Field Study. So I do look forward to seeing you folks again, maybe in a couple of years. So again, back in 1983, for enrollment of children, of course, in Hawaiian medium, we had no such school 36 years ago. Back then, we counted less than 50 young children under the age of 17 who were fluent or native speakers in their language. So when you count under 50, compared to just 3,351 actively currently enrolled, I can see that as a great achievement, I think, for Hawaiian medium education. Hawaiian medium education is wonderful because it brings the world right into our language. In other words, our language has to face the world through speaking it for today's world. And the content of education brings that to the fore. And it's a challenge that we need to meet. So I want to discuss some key threads of the fabric of Hawaiian medium education. I'll go through them very quickly and cover them in my PowerPoint here. So basically, we need to begin, and we need to complete a successful cycle. The first cycle may not be the perfect one, but we need to begin and we need to complete it as successfully as possible. 100% Hawaiian immersion, not 5 hours a week, not 10 hours a week, but every day from 7:30 in the morning to whenever school ends, 3:30 in the afternoon, 5 days a week. And we just ended our school season this month, right now, in June, and begin again in August. So that's the kind of routine, I think, that most people throughout the world manage with education. It's quite intensive. So some kind of, we need to have influencing policymaker. We heard a lot of that this morning about legislation, about policies, about laws, etc. Some kind of personnel resource that is, of course, key if we're going to be using the medium of formal education. And we need to have some type of relevant curriculum because we can't just order it off of Amazon. Nobody's making that for us to order. We have to make it ourselves. A Hawaiian philosophy, a native indigenous philosophy of education. We cannot simply take what we have in Hawaii, in English philosophy of education, translate that into Hawaiian, and that makes it Hawaiian. No. It's our way of seeing the world, our way, found on our foundations of our cultural heritage and our language, and the way we want our children to be educated through our language. And our language is key to binding us to that identity. Language is always first. That's, common philosophy. Language is always first. Everything else comes after. And of course, we have ongoing developments happening with the application and application of documentation of culture and language for reinforcing our language learning in this state of being revitalized. In other words, we're not up and running. We're at a weaker stage. We need all the help we can get. And as our last native speakers go, documentation and utilizing them as much as possible, setting the standards for what we're aiming for and even beyond is crucial. And of course, we need to have a committed committee or group of committed, dedicated, and a creative leadership. It takes a lot of creativity as well as determination, being unconventional in a conventional, if I'd say English or French world. How do we become conventional in that kind of a world? And of course, when we pursue our education, we pursue them with always looking to improve what we're doing, and then making practical or sound expansion decisions. Can't just rush ahead and flop around and close down and start again and flop around and close down. Try to do the best judgments that we can so we can continue doing quality education. And this, of course, will provide for a more living language and a vibrant people. Oops. Did I go back one? Okay. I think I'm there. Oh, there's the one I wanted. Now, I'm showing you the name of our college, which is a long name she was just pronouncing, Kahakaula, which is a word for literally like a rainbow, because in the emblem, the sign of a rainbow, dwells our leadership. In Hawaii, we have kings and queens, chiefs and chiefesses. We had a kingdom until it was overthrown by the United States in 1893. And Ke'elikolani is the great-granddaughter of King Kamehameha the Great, who united our islands under one kingdom, and we wanted to name our college in honor of her. So Kahaka'ula o Ke'elikolani. Ke'elikolani was served over 20 years as governor of our island and insisted on using just Hawaiian, although she could speak English, but she said, no, you deal with me in my language. So in that way, we wanted to honor her. And she died in her home in Kailua Kona. For those of you who have been to Hulihe'e Palace in Kailua, she preferred to live in her traditional grass home. And the name of her home was Hale'olelo, House of Language. And we could not think of a better name when we constructed our new college building 5 years ago. So we named it Hale'olelo, House of Language. But for Ke'elikolani, Princess Ke'elikolani, it meant more than just language. It means governance. In language is conducted the law of the land. And here we have our source of new speakers. They go through 4 or 5 years of language instruction every day, 50 minutes a day. We have now a bachelor's degree in Hawaiian. We never had one. We created one in the early 80s. From there, we created the graduate program, a master's degree in Hawaiian language. We also finally have a PhD in 2004 to have for the regeneration or revitalization of Hawaiian language and culture. So now that we've established our College of Hawaiian Language in 1997, we're pursuing you might say, preschool, all the way up to the university level through the medium of Hawaiian. Because our college program is geared to the support of our Hawaiian medium programs, our Hawaiian immersion programs in the public school system. Here are our products, and we need to focus on young, new, second language learners at this stage, as our second language parents are becoming parents regenerating their children in their homes and even grandchildren. We have 3 generations now speaking Hawaiian. Continuing, I'm doing a very fast one on our college. I just have to say that when we started, I was teaching Hawaiian at the university when I was 26 years old, 1970. I happened to have a batch of good students, and these few good students became the lecturers and professors at the University of Hawaii teaching Hawaiian. They helped. We got together and we all worked together to establish the Bachelor's of Hawaiian degree and the rest of the degrees that we have, our program. And it was very important that we also started the Punana Leo in the communities so that our college program connects directly to our community programs. That kind of coordination is key, especially when you're working on producing fluent speakers. And the native speakers might come out of that kind of partnering, as you call it, getting married and having kids. And of course, the college doesn't say, you get married to somebody who speaks Hawaiian now. It just happens. It's been happening. So somehow it gels, you know. And here we have just a photo of the, to begin. So 1985 was the first Punana Leo. It took 15 years for them to graduate from high school. And here they are back in the Punana Leo preschool where they started, saying aloha to all their children there. This was in 1999, the first graduating class. So this is 2019. We're having a celebration for our 20th high school graduation. Yeah. Mahalo. Now, establishing new conventions and influencing policymakers, every country, I'm sure, has challenges like this. So in Hawaii, I'll just start off with 1978, which is when our Constitutional Convention got together and said, the delegates there, we need to establish Hawaiian language as an official language of the state of Hawaii. And so the populace voted to approve that, and we became the first state in the United States to acknowledge its native language as an official language of the state. Now that came about in 1978, not only through a convention, but we were experiencing what we called a Hawaiian Renaissance of culture and language that mainly came from young people, musicians, people objecting to urban sprawl, the voyaging, rediscovery of our navigational open voyaging skills on the open ocean, returning of certain lands used for military training, such kinds of issues as that brought attention to what developed into the Hawaiian Renaissance. So this helped to promote the delegates at our convention to consider that Hawaiian should be established as a official language next to English in the state of Hawaii. Of course, Alaska now has 20 of its languages declared. I understand they wanted to add 2 or 3 more, so maybe it'll be 23. Because this means, what does that status mean? It means we have to work. It means there's no teeth to something on a piece of paper unless you say it really is living. But what it does is it helps. It helps. So when we started our Punana Leo, we were university professors, teachers. We didn't know anything about preschool education, but we learned very quickly. And we said our main teachers are going to be the last remaining native speakers that we had. Unfortunately, the native speakers did not have a certification in early childhood education. So we had to go to the legislature to say our language requires right now, at this moment, the exposure of our young children to first language speakers. We went to the legislature for 2 years, and finally, we found a loophole, because I don't know if you've also heard about President Obama going to one of our private schools that was started by the missionary families to keep their children away from Hawaiian-speaking children. Anyway, politics has all kinds of players involved. And their feeder school into that particular school was exempt. They didn't have to have certified teachers. So we became exempt. So now in Hawaii, our native-speaking teachers can teach, can be exposed in a preschool setting with, of course, before we got that exemption, we had monthly inspections by the Department of Social Services to be sure that we're not abusing our children. They're being well cared for. We had the right facilities for them, etc. Right now, we can't use native speakers because we only have 20 left. But at the time when we started, 36 years ago, it was very important. So thank goodness we had that ability to do that. And we continued, of course, as I said, pursuing the quality education by employing our very fluent second language learners from the college level, meeting with our native speakers in that environment. So 1896, we had this law from the Republic of Hawaii. Like most of our places, people who are suffering endangerment now, a key area of demise of a language is to go and snuff it out of the throats of children. So they go to school in Hawaii in 1896, and you cannot speak Hawaiian, you cannot learn anything through your own language. You must learn it in Hawaii was English. So when we started our Punana Leo in 1985, 86, we found out that we're doing another illegal thing, which is educating our children through Hawaiian. So we had to remove this law from the Book of Statutes, which is easily done because the best thing that we could have done as a legislature was to take our little children, 3 years and above, and demonstrate and testify in front of those legislators about how we are conducting our school. If they can't come down to school personally, we'll bring the children to them. So they became very familiar with our program. And so it wasn't towards the end of 86, too difficult to hold. It was a marathon meeting, hearing about 5 hours. You had all the professionals on one side of the room, and then we had all of these native speaker teachers, elders on the other side. Finally, the bill went through that we need to have native speakers to keep our Hawaiian language alive. So the bill passed. That doesn't mean that we don't work on improving the quality of our teachers, however. So in 1986, we also began to, that removed the 1896 law, and our children, anticipating the first graduates from our preschool, were already becoming 5 years old. And so we approached the Department of Education that we wanted to continue our Hawaiian medium education through the public school system, the Department of Education. It just happened that that year, the superintendent of the Department of Education was at the legislature as a representative, well familiar with our program, and you'll hear him later testifying today. I'm curious to know what he would have said back then. He would have said exactly what I heard was, he supports it, but you have to get my board to support it, because he became very familiar with our program. Another thing that happened in the United States in 1981 was this English-only movement. Remove the Spanish language from we don't need to spend millions of dollars educating through bilingual education, get non-English speakers to speak English. So for about a decade, 10 years, this became a threat to us in Hawaii. And as Hawaiians today, we are not officially native people of the United States, but we are still native of our own place. So we decided that we wanted to meet with the Native American Indian people, and we began to meet with them. The first meeting we had was in 86 and 87. This is through the organization called NALI, Native American Languages Institute. And this issue is what we brought up to them by saying, let's get together and pass legislation in Congress to protect all indigenous American languages, United States American languages. And we have a good senator from Hawaii, Daniel K. Inouye, who happened just to be the chairperson of the Indian Bureau of Affairs. He was open to listening to this. And finally, in 1990, we got the Native American Languages Act passed to include Native Americans and Native people of the territories of the United States. So this is in 1987, Hawaii Department of Education Superintendent. We'll have a brief listen in. As I said, this is in his retirement years, and I'm so pleased to hear how satisfied he is when he's talking now about the decisions that he made. Can we roll the tape, please?
I was appointed the school superintendent in January 1987. So I went over from the legislature to the DOE, and it was the Punana Leo group that came over, and we talked about how we were going to implement the law that was just passed in the 86 session. When I went to look into what we needed to do in the DOE, I found many, many challenges. One, I had a Board of Education that was not totally supportive of using Hawaiian language as a medium to educate our youngsters. We had no budget. There was very little in terms of curriculum materials, but what we had were very enthusiastic parents, teachers, that said, we're going to do it. We're going to help develop the curriculum. We're going to go and help, and we're going to go and lobby the legislature to get funding for our budget. That's empowerment. They said, we're going to do it, and they did. Based on that kind of support, we decided to take to the Board of Education a proposal to start the program at 2 schools. one on the Big Island in Keaukaha, and the other at White House School.
So we had, as he said, no funding, no teachers, no curriculum. And all we had was this little program started by the Punana Leo, a preschool in two locations, he said, Hilo and Honolulu, and dedicated parents, dedicated teachers. We said, look, we will do it. That's how we started in the Department of Education on a probationary level only for the first 4 or 5 years. And then later on, 1990, the board gave official approval for a K or kindergarten through high school program. And at that time, the superintendent was Herman Aizawa. He's retired now. It's very heartfelt to hear his comments at this stage in his life on the kind of support he had rendered when he was the superintendent. Can we roll this video too?
There were problems with people being concerned about them not being able to be good in English along with the Hawaiian. And so we had to work with that group of people. And some of them came to the Board of Education, so we had to respond in public about it. But anybody who had very particular concerns, we worked basically with them. After maybe, I would say, 3 or 4 years, where they found that the students were doing just as well as the non-immersion students, that problem kind of went away. Essentially, it was not so much we pushing from our side, but the parents themselves had that belief to start with. And in regard to whether they were convinced, no, they came in pretty well convinced. And it's like anything else. In education, if you have your parents behind the child, they can overcome anything. And that's the important thing. Parent involvement was like at 100%. So we didn't have to say, you know, parents, maybe you should consider this program because it's going to be good for your child. We didn't have to do that. They were already coming in with that.
Okay, so that was Dr. Aizawa, Herman Aizawa, in his retirement years. And so, of course, for now, we had a full-fledged public school that the state of Hawaii pays for Hawaiian immersion. And that's wonderful. And it's open to the public. Glad to say, however, that over 95% of parents who volunteer to be a part of this program are ethnic Hawaiian, but you don't have to be ethnic Hawaiian or Hawaiian to be enrolled in our program. So we have non-ethnic Hawaiians as well. I mentioned earlier that we need to build a resource for teachers and curriculum. We have a Hawaiian Language Center established at the College of Hawaiian Language called Halikumo'o, and the main mandate of Halikumo'o is to create appropriate Hawaiian language curriculum and also to license Hawaiian immersion teachers. And let's see. And the philosophy of the Hawaiian medium education, I'll try and do this very briefly because it can be kind of a bit involved. When we started, we were very conscious that we wanted to do our education program based on Hawaiian culture. And when we started, we didn't have it all figured out, but as we worked and we got together and worked with our native speakers, our elders and all, and then we came up with a document called the Kumuhonua Mauliola, and that's available online at the Ahapunana Leo website. And here, as you see, basically the idea is when a person and human is born, we have a spirit of life. And what do we do with that spirit of life? How do we make it our spirit of life, the Hawaiian, the native, the indigenous? And so we connect through umbilicals first, basically to umbilical cord where we connect to our placenta. And that means we are connected to a long, long line of genealogy. And through this genealogy is what we need to perpetuate and continue in a very changing world. The law of being alive today, I guess, is to change, but to change as Hawaiian as possible. And of course, connecting to the placenta, the honua, we have, of course, as soon as the baby comes out, into the home of the family, the parents, the grandparents, aunts and uncles, everything that contributes to that life. Then it becomes part of the community, and then out into the ao holo'oko'a, the big world, where that person functions healthy and successfully in his own or in her own identity and language. And continuing with the Kumuhono Mauliola, we have 4 components, which is, of course, connecting to our pili uhane, or spirituality, our olelo, of course, our language always, and lavena, our behavior, and our cultural behavior and a cultural traditional knowledge. This makes up the Maoli Hawaii, the Maoli Kanaka, our Hawaiian identity. Now we have 4 lab schools under the College of Hawaiian Language, 4 Hawaiian language medium schools that we can work closely with, and one of them is Navahe o Kalani Opu'u. Some of you have visited that school. And of course, the philosophy of that school is Hawaiian language first. Hawaiian language first. Everything else comes after. So just recently, 3 weeks ago, the National Public Radio had produced a 35-minute interview program, audio. I'm going to just play a brief section of that pertaining to the school. And we added some photos, so we did the best job we could do in a rush. Can we roll the video, please?
Gene.
Shireen.
Code switch. All right, Shireen, so you said that about 40 years ago, this group of Hawaiians who learned to speak their native language as adults set out on this mission to keep that language alive.
And they decided the best way to do that was to begin at the beginning. Teach the babies.
Because our brains are better at learning languages the younger we are.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so knowing that, these folks took that notion and ran with it, and they created a nonprofit preschool program that turned into a full-fledged public school?
That's right. And that school graduated its 20th class of seniors this year.
Wow.
And all of the instruction at that school is in Hawaiian, all of it. English is taught as a second language.
What? Wow.
And school employees are required to speak Hawaiian, from the groundskeepers to the principal.
And that's where you're taking us.
It was really hard to believe that in the mid-'80s, there were only a handful of kids enrolled in the preschool, the Punana Leo, here on the Big Island. Because when we got to Navahe, there were more than 400 kids outside greeting us. A sophomore stepped forward named Ipono Valenti and gave a passionate speech about how the students were facing down huge obstacles to bring back Hawaiian. He related their journey to an ancient Hawaiian story about Hi'iaka, the goddess of hula. She took a journey of her own through a forest home to a treacherous monster. Hi'iaka's advisors told her to take the safe route through the forest, but she refused and killed the monster who stood in her way. And then it was our turn to be introduced.
Code switch.
We spent the day on campus, saw babies as young as 9 months old learning Hawaiian through music. We visited different classes. That's a student telling us we're in 5th grade math. The kids were learning about the metric system. We watched the middle school students practice hula during gym.
O Kawanoi, Kamana Ko'inoa, I am the principal of Kekula o Navahe o Kalani Opu.
Kawanoi, the principal of Navahe, was one of Professor Larry Kimura's students and a part of that original group that decided they were not letting Hawaiian die on their watch.
And we were all second language learners. And some people say, well, that's not native fluency. But for us, that's what we had, You work with what you have. So for the majority of the families who signed up at the beginning, they were not speakers yet. They became speakers in the course of being together over the years. And then they became teachers.
What you observe really fast at Navahe is that this is still a family affair. A lot of teachers and students are related. Same goes for the rest of the staff. Kawanoi married her college sweetheart. They met studying Hawaiian, and they were a part of that first group of families who brought Hawaiian back into the home. It was their children's first language. Kawanoi's eldest son was a part of Navahe's very first graduating class in 1999. So Kawanoi is really serious about how this school is not your typical language immersion school. It's a way of life.
Other people come to this school, but the program is set up for families who use Hawaiian as the language of the home, and this is the school that they come to. The language is always the core of what Navahe is about, always, always. It cannot be anything else. Everything else comes after.
Three boys blow into conch shells to mark the end of the school day for the kids.
The pencil is on the table. How do we start? Aya.
But on Thursday nights, school's back in session for the adults. Navahe has 4 levels of Hawaiian to help parents who want to speak more with their children at home. We're in level 1. And tonight, everyone's learning how to ask where something is and how to answer that question. Where's the pencil? The pencil's on the table. Where are my soccer cleats? Your cleats are in the garage. Basic things kids might ask at home.
So find a partner. Each one of you comes up with 3 questions.
There are about a dozen adults in level 1 this evening. Most are dads. I cornered a few after class.
Aloha, Makaino Mitchell Peters.
My name is Earl Kaivi.
And what brings you to class?
I live the Hawaiian life, but I don't talk too much Hawaiian, so I'm just grateful that they have this class for us parents so we can pick up and learn along with our kids.
Because I'm outnumbered at my house.
Who else is outnumbered at their house? Are you outnumbered too?
My name is Tai Makanui. I'm a father of 2 children. And along like Mitch, I'm outnumbered at home because my wife, she works at the Hawaiian Language College.
Did your wife make you feel like you had to come here, or are you coming on your own volition?
No, I'm coming on my own to learn so I can conversate with my kids and understand what they're saying, talk stories and stuff. But then, my oldest one, he's way more advanced because he's already in Papaikahi, the 1st grade. And then he's always correcting me. He go, no, that's not correct. You're not saying it. So I always go back to English.
These guys are learning Hawaiian much later in life. Ty and Earl are in their 40s, and Mitchell's in his late 50s. Do you feel like it's changed you in any way, learning more Hawaiian?
I guess Hawaiians have a very deep culture. It helps you reconnect.
Yeah.
For me, it brought me, I guess, closer to the land, to the people. My grandma was pure Hawaiian, but she always told me that they wasn't allowed to talk Hawaiian. It was kind of like they was banned from talking Hawaiian. She felt like I needed to learn English. Now I'm trying to learn Hawaiian. It's not easy for learning at this age.
Ty told a similar story to Earl's. When he was a kid, he'd help out at his uncle's taro patch with his cousins, and he remembers the old folks talking to each other in Hawaiian.
But then same like him, they would say like, no, we're not teaching you guys. They look down on you guys if you guys learn the language. It wasn't, I guess, popular, you could say, like how it is now.
The very popular language learning app, Duolingo, added Hawaiian to its roster of languages in October of 2018. And today in Hawaii, there are a dozen Punana Leo preschools and nearly 24 other schools that are referred to as Hawaiian immersion, which can mean different things. Right now, Navahe is the only campus where a child can go from 9 months old all the way through high school entirely in Hawaiian.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And the interview is 35 minutes, so I think I just played 8 minutes of it. But if you want to listen to it, it's at this link here, NPR Code Switch broadcast. And so we did start, of course, our documentation and development of our documentation so we can use it in practical situations, simple things, maybe not so simple anymore, but a language of the home. How do you scold your child in Hawaiian? How do you discipline them? Or how do you say nice things as well? How do you cook and all of those kinds of, how do you grate a carrot? I mean, in Hawaiian, verbs vary on how to use the correct language. And those are kinds of things that we had to focus on as well outside, because we're learning the language now for fluent native-speaking parents. And definitely we want to affect the native-speaking ability of their children as they're being raised in the home, in their homes. And here's this batch of a committee still hanging in there, but we're trying to get, of course, the new crop of leaders coming up, and there's definitely lots of new leaders coming about who are committed, and of course being creative, non-conventional, not just to be rebellious, but that's not a good word. It's just to be moving our language into renormalization, and that's the bigger task. The bigger task outside of the home, outside of the school environment, now getting it into the bigger world, immediately just, in our court systems, in our stores, our government, etc. And so we need to pursue improvement in our Hawaiian medium education with practical expansion. And so here's a photo of over 1,000 Hawaiian immersion students on the island of Oahu who gathered in 2008 to celebrate the state at the Capitol, to celebrate the year of the Hawaiian that was declared for that year. And 30 years in 2018 of the Hawaiian immersion schools in the Department of Education. So again, a living language for vibrant people. Mahalo anui loa ia kākou apalua.